Hello. Flyers re-signed Christian Dvorak to a 5-year deal. Just over $25 million over the course of the contract. I'm going to tell you why it's the best signing in Flyers history and why it does not deserve any scrutiny. Just kidding. We're going to try to let's rock and roll. Let's have some fun tonight. Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. Figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. Oh, the new era of orange. Oh, the Danny Bree era. Oh, we're so fucked. Oh, boy. You know, there was a time last year where I remember sitting down. I think it was over on Snow the Goalie, and I think it was Danny and Keith Jones and Dan Hilferty. We were talking about a lot of money coming off the books in 2026. And that stuck with me. That stuck with me for a while because the 2026 free agent class was going to have Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, and Artemi Panarin, although I don't think that was ever really going to be a thing. And then you started looking at 2027 and you said, all right, well, Quinn Hughes is going to be a free agent. And, you know, maybe there's a really quick path. Maybe there's a really quick way to turn this thing around. Somebody's going to somehow sell the Flyers on being an absolute must visit destination for free agents. And that with John Tortorella as the coach, you know, they're going to play hard and they're going to make the playoffs and it's going to be great. Fast forward a year, the 2026 free agent class is gone. Quinn Hughes is still set to be a free agent in 2027, although he's, you know, talking about how the big balls move by Bill Guerin and Minnesota will certainly give him reason to think about re-upping their long-term. Connor McDavid signed a short-term deal, so he'll be up in 27 as well. But you went from about a year ago hoping that you were going to get a meeting with Connor McDavid in the summer of 2026 to re-signing Christian Dvorak to a 5-year deal. 5, not 3. 3 would have been totally fine. Would have made sense. 3 years, 5-year or $5 million cap hit. You want to talk me into, hey, you know, it was a sliding scale on AAV, and you know maybe it was going to take 6.25 over 3 years. I probably could have come around on it. I probably could have talked myself into like a $6-ish million cap hit. Listen, if you had held a proverbial gun to my head and said 3 years, 6.5, or 5 years, 5.15. I would have taken the 3 years and 6.5. I would have. I very much would have. Because this signing, and I'm going to get to the comments. I'll pop the comments up in the bottom right corner of the screen. For those of you who are new to the show, hello, welcome in. Shows on YouTube, Facebook, X. Sometimes we get irreverent here. Sometimes we get loony and zany, and we have a lot of fun. And that still might happen today. I have no idea. But man, I'm like, I have this like back and forth, right? Like everything is on a scale, right? And you try to evaluate the pros and cons of any deal. And this contract to me, I'm still like just trying to do the mental gymnastics. Like, how do you get to a 5-year contract at just over $5 million per with a no trade clause, a full no trade clause for, I think it was 2 years. I'm going to pull up the full press release here from the team, but a no trade clause that then becomes a partial no trade clause over the course of the contract. And I think by that final year, that provision might go away, but you're definitely looking at a no trade provision in there for the first 2 years. Now, I will say really quickly before we get into the merit of the contract, the Flyers put out a statement. They announced this at 8:14 p.m. on Monday, January 5th. Danny Briere had the following to say about Christian Dvorak and about this signing. Quote, We're very happy to have Christian be a part of the Philadelphia Flyers for the foreseeable future. He has played a pivotal role in our team's success this season and proven to be a reliable two-way center that can be trusted in all situations. More importantly, he plays a big role in our locker room and has fit in seamlessly to our group and what we are building. Now, Dvorak is 29. He turns 30 in just under a month from now. Now, I'm not an ageist, so I will allow here. They signed a 29-year-old to a 5-year deal. We're going to weigh all the pros and cons on the show because we try to be fair and balanced. I will report, you decide. You decide whether or not I'm fair and balanced in the take here, right? But man, I have so many conflicting thoughts. So let me kind of parse this out, and then I'll go out to the comments, okay? Christian Dvorak, is he a bad player? No. Is he a great player? Of course not. Is he a bottom six forward? Yeah. Is he a center? Yeah. Have the Flyers made some mistakes along the way in this negotiation probably, and this may portend bad things about the negotiations they're going to have with Trevor Zegras? Yeah, probably. So I've been kind of living on this island. We'll call it Joy Island, okay? I've been living on this island this season where I've said I have no problem conceptually with the Flyers re-signing a guy like Christian Dvorak. No issue with it on a short-term deal, even if it's at a higher AAV, because I want the flexibility, right? Any team should want flexibility. But I've also been very outspoken that I think you are getting very difficult to evaluate data points by having Christian Dvorak and Trevor Zegras tied at the hip, right? Because one of two things is at play, right? Christian Dvorak right now is on pace for, I think, around 52 points. He has never gone over 38 points in his entire career. So right now he is trending to a career year. Cool. He's been tied at the hip to Trevor Zegras, who's been a point per game player so far this year, or around that for much of the season. And so you say, well, that's cool too. The problem is that because they have been so tied at the hip, it's kind of hard to know where the success of one ends and the success of another begins. We don't have a way right now to be able to determine how much of Trevor Zegras' point per game pace is because of the defensive responsibility and that two-way centerdom, right, that Danny Briere talked about in that press release. How much of Zegras' success is tied directly to playing with a responsible player who can kind of play a hybrid role in Christian Dvorak? How much of Christian Dvorak's, career year is tied directly to Trevor Zegras? Is Trevor Zegras a point per game player if he's playing with wingers who are not as defensively responsible? I don't know. Is Dvorak as good of a player? Is he capable of raising the game of other line mates the same way that he may have been responsible for helping Trevor Zegras unlock this point per game player? We don't know because they won't split them up. We also don't know if Trevor Zegras is a center or not. The Flyers very clearly seem to believe that he is not a center, even though they have Dvorak take faceoffs, and oftentimes, Zegras kind of drifts into the role of a center and Dvorak kind of flops back out to the wing. We haven't really seen whether or not Trevor Zegras can actually be a center, which to me is problematic because, all right, the Dvorak deal is done and we still have to break this down. But the Zegras of it all is also just kind of floating out there because you don't have a way to know for sure whether or not Zegras should be compensated as a wing or a center. Now, you would assume that Zegras and his camp would like him to receive the compensation of a center, which is at a significantly higher rate than what a winger would get. And yet the Flyers appear allergic to the idea. They seem to lose their minds at the idea of giving Trevor Zegras a 10 to 15 game look at center. Is that a negotiating tactic? Are they hoping that, we can have Trevor Zegras be a point per game guy playing on the wing? We'll compensate him appropriately. And then next year, we'll move him and Dvorak off the same line and Zegras will be a center and it'll be an ultimate steal. I don't know. That would seem to be pretty freaking insane, but it is the Flyers. You never know. So we don't have a way to know for certain what Dvorak and Zegras are going to look like under this coach in this system apart from one another. That to me is like an ultimate failure. All right. There is no getting around it. You can argue out there if you want, well, if they're finding so much success together and this team is trying to win each and every game, well, then it is a good thing that they're stuck together. You shouldn't split them up. Don't split up something that isn't working just so you can figure out how to negotiate better. And yet, I question openly, what will happen in a scenario where they are split up? Will Trevor Zegras be that point per game guy? Will Christian Dvorak look like this version of Christian Dvorak, this all-time best version, right? At least in terms of counting stats. Dvorak looks like he is on pace and very well could exceed all of his career highs. They're not going to be tied at the hip for the rest of their career. They're not going to be tied at the hip for the next 5 years. I find that almost impossible to fathom, right? So then you get into the Dvorak of this contract. 5 years, $5.15 million. That's a 25.5, whatever it is, $1 million deal. And you look at it and you go, okay, is there a way to make sense of the contract? Can we, as a collective, come up with how you get to a $25.75 million deal? Yeah, I can. So I'll present you the pros and we'll talk about the cons. And I see lots of pros and many cons in the comments. Pro, Christian Dvorak would have been the best center on a 2026 free agent market that is bereft of centers. There are no decent centers available in 2026, which means that a team that is desperate for a center very likely could have vastly overpaid for Christian Dvorak. That is possible. And if you're the Flyers and you thought that, hey, we're going to get to the offseason, we're going to need to acquire a center anyway, they might not have wanted to get into a bidding war for Christian Dvorak. And make no mistake, I think that Dvorak probably would have gotten $6 million, maybe $6.25 a year if he had gone to free agency. I do. Now, would a team have given him 5 years? I don't know. But I do think that on this free agent market, you're probably looking at a $6 million plus AAV. So to that end, you say, all right, good bit of business by the Flyers. They maybe saved $750,000 or so a year. All right, kudos to the Fly guys there. There's a positive. It's about where it ends, because here's the thing. If the Flyers didn't like the price, if they weren't in line with this price, this term for Christian Dvorak, they could have theoretically traded him before the deadline. And we saw Scott Laughton, of all people, fetch a first-round pick and a roster player, Nikita Grabenkin. Dvorak, I would argue, is a better player, a better version of Scott Laughton. So could that have fetched you a first-round pick at this year's trade deadline? Well, once again, based on the fact that there are no good centers available in free agency, I would tend to think, yeah, you probably could have gotten a first-round pick for Christian Dvorak around the trade deadline. Would that have been a good allocation of resources? Would it have made a lot of sense for the Flyers to move off of a guy like Dvorak while they are in the midst of a all things considered successful season, at least in terms of wins, losses, points, and where it looks like they're going to head, going towards a very likely at this point, very strong possibility of a playoff spot? I don't know how you would have made up for that, which leads us to what I think this contract really is, which is an admission of failure. It is. Now, there are going to be people that will tell you tonight, tomorrow, they'll write it up. They'll go on shows tomorrow and they'll argue that this is not an admission of failure. But make no mistake about it. If the Flyers truly believed that a guy like, I don't know, Jet Lachenko were ready to come and play in the NHL, if not this season, but next, they would not have made this signing. It would have made no sense to do it. Because I don't even think the most ardent supporter of Jet Lachenko believes that he is a 1C or a 2C. They are probably resigning themselves right now to the idea that Lachenko at this point, given his current trajectory, given his current development, is probably at best a 3C coming into the league, maybe next year or the year after. They would not bring him up here to play 2C. So you're admitting by making this signing, Lachenko's not ready to be a 3C. That is a problem on a few levels. You're also admitting that Jack Nesbitt won't be ready next year, which I don't think anybody thought he would be. I know that he was another first-round pick, and you could make the argument that the Flyers traded multiple assets to move up and get Nesbitt. He, to me, is not a guy that was being viewed as somebody who would make the roster next year, right? So I'm fine with saying that's your one project center. That's fine. That's cool. Enjoy that. I actually think Nesbitt's going to be a good player, but that's farther off. It, to me, is an admission that Lachenko is not going to be ready. And there is an argument out there that this Flyers team needs elite talent and that Dvorak is not that. I don't think there's anybody right now who's trying to sell you on the idea that Christian Dvorak is an elite player. He's not. He's a bottom six forward. And on a good team, he's probably a 3C, probably. And at $5.15 million with an increase in cap, is it really the worst thing in the world? No. On a 5-year deal, though, it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of red flags. Like right now, if you were again, a big believer in Jetlachenko. Well, a 3-year deal wouldn't throw you off, right? Because you would say, all right, by year 2 or year 3 of the contract, if Lachenko comes in and he plays well and he looks good and Dvorak is occupying that 3C spot, you can move off of him with a year left and you feel fine. But it's a 5-year deal. It's not giving you any indication that this team believes they have anyone in the pipeline right now who can take those bottom 6 minutes over the next few years. You could also make the argument if you really want, well, $5.15 million is a good AAV, and that with a cap going up and with a league that is constantly looking for centers, maybe 2 years from now, once the full no trade clause is up, and maybe it's a limited thing to 5 teams, 10 teams, 15 teams, whatever, they'll be able to move Dvorak in year 3. But then can I just really quickly posit that if you're looking at this contract saying, well, it's okay for short term, but like we could probably move him in years 3, 4, or 5, then it's probably not a great contract to hand out. Like the idea of signing a guy to an extended period of time should be, we want this guy to be in our uniform for the entirety of the contract. We want this guy to make us look brilliant over the course of years 3, 4, and 5. And with a rising cap, we want to talk about this in like the 2028, 29 season as being the biggest steal in the entire league. How did the Flyers get Christian Dvorak to take just over $5 million, knowing the cap was going to go? I don't see that playing out. I think that there's a very realistic path here that Dvorak ends up playing bottom 6 minutes for this team for the next 3 or 4 years. And that maybe in that final season, you're going, ooh, you might have to eat it. You might have to attach a pick. You might have to take back a bad contract. Like you can look around this league and you can look around at different players, bottom 6 guys or guys who start to fall into that bottom 6 later on in their careers. And there's a precipitous fall off. I look at like Wayne Simmons. Wayne Simmons was a really good player. We talked about Simmons. We talked about Lawton before. Simmons and Lawton's a little bit different. He's not quite at that precipitous fall off point yet, but Wayne Simmons was. We see Garnet Hathaway this year. He's in the midst of very, very precipitous fall off. I would be concerned that within 2 years, Dvorak, if he's split up from Trevor Zegras, who again, this team refuses to split him up from, could we be looking at a real albatross where 2 years from now, you're going, wow, we have 3 years left at $5.15 million and we need to move this guy. It's possible. I would like to lean more on the positive side that I think Dvorak is a good player, not a great player, and that a $5 million cap hit with a rising cap isn't going to be the end of days. But I understand skepticism around it. My bigger concern in all of this is, all right, cool. Like here you are. You have Noah Cates, who re-signed in the offseason to play probably 3C. Well, is he now your 4C? Or like when you get better or potentially somehow acquire a 1C or a 2C, God love you, like good luck. If that were to happen, are you now going to pay Noah Cates to play 4C? Are you giving Dvorak $5 million to play the 4C? Like who's going there? Does bringing back Dvorak now make Noah Cates more expendable? Like if you're able to actually go out and make a move for I would say a 2C. Nobody's going to trade you a 1C. Does Noah Cates now become part of a bigger package to try to go out and get a 2C or to go out and get what you would hope is going to become like a number 1 defenseman or like a 1.5 defenseman, a top pair defenseman who's not a true number 1? I don't know. But there you go. You have like 2 guys in theory that could be your 3C and 4C. They're both under contract and they're going to count what, $9.15 million against your cap for the next 4 years. Seems like a lot. You also have Sean Couturier, who, bless his heart, 2 back surgeries, out there gutting it out every day. Not a terrible player, despite what social media might tell you. Not a horrible player, but certainly not the Selke winning Sean Couturier. Certainly not the guy that for a long time did look like he could have been a top 2 center on a Stanley Cup contender year in and year out. He's not that guy anymore. So that also kind of drops. You can make an argument if you want to that Couturier would be better served playing third line center minutes. Okay, well, if that's true, then does that mean Dvorak has to be a 2C now? Does he have to be the 1C now? And again, without splitting him and Zegras up. Even if you wanted to say, hey, Trevor Zegras is going to be your top center. Okay, well, if he's your 1C, now you're going to you are effectively linking and locking in Dvorak as a top line player. Is that realistic? No, shouldn't be. So again, very, very questionable decision. And here's your bigger issue. If you are in the camp of this team needs to get better, needs to get elite talent, right? This is a move that you make if you feel like you are a perennial playoff contender and you're looking to lock in some guys ahead of time, ahead of that window to contend for a Stanley Cup. Or you're a team that feels like they're a playoff contender and you have a couple of elite prospects in the pipeline that are going to come up over the next year or so. And now you have your lower half of the lineup locked in. Maybe you have a couple of the guys on the top line and maybe the second line locked in. Those younger guys are going to come up. They're going to fill in. They're going to be the truly underpaid guys, but they're going to, exceed expectations. They're going to be this fantastic, potential generational talent that you got high in the draft, and they're just on their way. And, it's almost like the rookie quarterback in the NFL. Like these guys are getting way undercompensated relative to their importance on the team. You're not there. You don't have that. There isn't that super elite pipeline of talent coming. Porter Martone, really, really good prospect. Porter Martone, the guy that, if Vancouver were going to trade Quinn Hughes, had to be included in the deal, akin to Zeev Buium being in the deal that ultimately was made for Quinn Hughes. He's it. We can all get excited about Jack Berglund having a really nice World Junior, but is he an elite prospect? No. Is there a soul right now who believes that he's going to be a 1C for this team? No. Does anybody really think Jet Lachenko is going to be a 1C? No. Does anybody really think Jet Lachenko is going to be a 2C, given what we've seen so far? There might be a couple of delusional people, but for the most part, no. Where is the elite talent? It's year 3 of the rebuild. Where is the elite talent? Matvei Mishkov fell from what probably would have been the number 2 pick in his draft to where the Flyers were at. Awesome. He fell to them. They got lucky. They got a potentially elite talent. It's been a step back year for him. You hope that next year he goes into the offseason with his head on the right way, works his ass off, comes back out with absolute fire under his ass, fire in his skates, and he erases any of the negative feelings that have happened so far this year. And you hope that obviously that takes off at some point between now and the end of this season, and you get into the playoffs and Mishkov steps up his game in a big way, and he looks like a real clutch player in the postseason, and that would be great. He came over early. This has been not the best second season for him. Martone is in the pipeline. Lachenko looks like a bottom 6 forward at best. The elite talent's not there. So you're locking up your bottom of the lineup guys. You have a guy like a Travis Konechny, who I think is probably on a cup contending team, is probably a second liner. You have a guy in Owen Tippett that I don't think fits the system and doesn't really fit the team. You've got him lined up for a number of years. Maybe he becomes a tradable asset. You have Tyson Forster, who looked like he was going to potentially be a 40-goal scorer and take that next step, but now he seems to be injury prone, and it's unfortunate, but he's had multiple injuries, so now that's a concern. I get why people are worked up. I get why people are frustrated. I think that there's probably a large segment of the fan base that is starting to take this Dvorak signing, and they're trying to take out all the frustrations about what could be viewed as a quasi-failure of a rebuild to this point, and they're now attaching that to Dvorak. It's not Dvorak's fault. He got a 5-year deal. Good for him. On the human side of things, good for him, good for the player. But should the Flyers have had to include a no-trade clause to make it happen? No. Should they have needed to give a 5-year deal? Probably not. Questionable decisions. We'll see if it ultimately pans out. Now, I'm going to go out to the comments here real quick. It seems like a lot of comments are coming in. So we'll go out to YouTube, Facebook, and X. Don't forget, if you're on X/Twitter, you have to click the video first, go into old Periscope mode. And if you leave a comment there, it'll pop up on the screen. All right, let's go out. Jamae says, 5 years? Why? Too long of a contract. Not good. Nick Abe over on Facebook, on YouTube says, F deal by Danny. No superstar will want to join this team. Havokin 45 says, it is a year longer than I wanted, but in a couple of seasons, 5 per is going to be a steal. Well, that's somebody bringing a little bit of positivity here. Chris Freed says, back to the future. Amadeo says, Sean Couturier and Christian Dvorak are both signed till past 2030 and will be the top 2 centers of this team. Someone please wake me up from the nightmare. Well, they're not going to both be the top 2 centers. They can't be. They just can't be. It can't happen. Something will have to give before then. Just cannot happen. Chris Freed says it's just like Danny decided he wanted to be just like Homer and Fletcher. Oh God. Don't bring up he who must not be named. Not today. Amadeus says a guy worth $2 to $3.5 million a year doesn't suddenly become a long-term extension. He's not a $2 or $3.5 million a year guy. He's been making roughly around $5 million over his last like 2 contracts. He's not a $2 or $3.5 million guy. He's not. That's silly. Nick Abe says no cups for the next 5 years. What? Right now, based on the rebuild and based on what they've gotten so far to show for it, I'm not planning a parade anytime soon. Chris Fried says in a dog-eat-dog world, Danny B is wearing milk bone underwear. Good God. Chris Fried says, will the next Snow the Goalie contract with the Flyers include a no-trade clause? I want a no-trade clause. Hell yeah. Let's go. Robert Behrman asks, what are the terms just got here? 5 million or 5 years, 5.15 million per year with a no-trade clause. So, yuck. Eminem's Encore 2010. That's a heck of a name. Says also has full no movement clause, years 1 to 2, modified no movement, years 3 and 4. I think it's no trade, not no movement, but either way, it's still rough. It is funny. Like I made the joke on Twitter. It's almost as if the Flyers are somehow under the impression that you need to have a no movement or a no trade clause in order to make a contract. It's as if it's like a required check mark on the doc you sign. You have to have a no trade clause involved if you are the Flyers trying to hand a player a contract. It seems silly to me, but here we are. Tim Tobin says, thought Ant said Dvorak wanted 3. How'd they end up at 5? So he said on Snow the Goalie last week that he thought Dvorak wanted a shorter term deal so then he could be open up for another contract, probably his last contract at age, 32? But the Flyers would want him on a longer term deal. Well, if that's the case, then the Flyers ultimately got what they wanted with the longer deal, and maybe the give was the no trade clause. Again, seems pretty crazy. Here we are. Let's see. Robert Behrman says trade him after 2 or 3 seasons, though, and it's reasonable still. So again, this is a totally fair point. It's a totally fair critique, right? Even if you hate the contract, if he ends up being a third line center at $5 million a year, it will be a good deal for somebody to take on in years 3, 4, maybe even 5 of the contract. But you have to hope that he is the player that is in the midst of this career year, and it's not a fluke, and it's not only because he's playing with Zegras. Those are the factors that I wanted to see them. Like you have the test group and you have the control group, right? And right now, I don't think you did enough of the test, right? You didn't actually split those two up and figure out what they can be apart, which I think can ultimately come back to blow up in this team's face. Let's see. Eminem's Encore says, Antimarco said the Flyers felt basically backed into a corner after that 3-year by $6 million deal got signed, like they couldn't have just traded him or let him walk even. Well, they could have, I guess. Jamie Rollo says, how long before we hear from our favorite Flyers front office apologist, Anthony Sanfilippo, tell us this is a great deal and we're all nuts? I could tell you I've already had some texts back and forth, and he is very much he's a fan of the deal and thinks that it's a good deal for the team. So, yeah. He likes the deal. He thinks that the no trade clause is being blown out of proportion and that people should take a deep breath and that it's going to be okay. Make of that what you will. Antigras says 5 years is nonsense. He was signed as a stopgap and now he's here for 6 years. I mean, that is a good way to think about it, I guess. It was a 1-year deal this year and they've given him an additional 5 years beyond it. It is a lot. Video guy Amadeus says Briere might be worse than Fletcher. That's not true. That's insane. That is not true. No, we're not going there. We're not going there. Hoboken 45 says, thank God it's not the $6 million plus it was rumored to be. Again, this is where if it were a short-term deal, if it were a 3-year deal at 6, I would be like, I'd kind of puke in my mouth a little bit, but I would get it. Woof. Nick Abe says, why would Quinn want to join this disaster? This is where I can maybe give you a little bit of positivity if you want it. If you don't want the positivity, well, then don't take the positivity. Here's the only rationale I can see being even remotely plausible. If you are to try to convince a guy like Quinn Hughes, we're not even going to include Connor McDavid because that's ridiculous. But if you are trying to figure out a way to make a case to a guy like Quinn Hughes, who's going to be a free agent in 2027, if you're going to try to make that pitch, you can try, but only if you're showing signs of improvement. Like if Quinn Hughes were a free agent right now, there's not a whole lot that the Flyers could do to offer Quinn Hughes a legitimate path to a Stanley Cup final. Nothing. There's nothing right now with this team that would tell you, yes, Stanley Cup contender 2 years from now or a year from now. Not at all. If the team makes the playoffs this year, if the team wins a first round series, if the team makes a couple of tweaks, makes a couple of trades or whatever in the offseason, and they go into next year, they go back to the playoffs and they win a round. They get close to winning a second round. And in that summer of 27, they say to Quinn Hughes, we think that you can help us get over the hump. We're also working on this, this, and this. Maybe that's the way that you make the pitch. You can't do it if you are not even remotely a playoff team. There's part of your problem. I really hate trying to make an excuse for this, though, because it's hard and it's bad and it feels kind of disingenuous. Let's see. Philly sports experts over on X says most incompetent franchise in all of sports. The Raiders would like a word. The Giants would like a word. You see that the Giants are keeping their GM in place? You see that today? It's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see if it pays off. There are also some the Sacramento Kings would also like a word, if you don't mind. I can keep going. Not the most incompetent franchise in all of sports, but this is not great. Air Raiders 8535 says positive spin. According to Kevin Kurz, the first 2 years are full, no trade, then limited for years 3 and 4, no protection year 5. So it's really confidence in him for 2 years and then they can move him. Listen, with a no trade clause in theory, right? Like if they were going to say, hey, we're going to trade you to Florida to go chase the Stanley Cup. He's probably going to waive the no trade clause. If you were going to give him 3 years anyway, is a full no trade in the first 2 years the end of days? Again, no. It would hurt a lot more if years 4 and 5 had a full no trade. That's where it would be really, really problematic. But I still don't feel like you needed to give a no trade, or you shouldn't have felt like you needed to. Tony Louie over on YouTube says, this is an absurd contract. Briere has gotten his ass kicked in every contract extension so far. Has he gotten his ass kicked in every deal? Okay, let me think. Connect me deal. I didn't like that. Tippett deal. I didn't like that. Vladar's worked out so far. Vladar's been good. Okay. Eminem's Encore says, Briere is quite good at making trades, seems to be pretty damn bad at signing contracts. Everybody has their pros and their cons. But yeah, this isn't great. Joe Papel says the Briere dropped the ball with Cutter, had a faux playoff run that cost us a shot at Demidov, took Lachenko over Buyam, and now this move that solidifies hockey purgatory. Not a good day, Russ. Well, this sounds like it came right out of the brain of Russ Joy. The Gauthier thing, I can't relitigate again, but there are a lot of reasons that he's not here. The faux playoff run is the thing that I think ultimately, when you look back on it, that is the thing that maybe threw the biggest wrench into this entire rebuild. That was a bullshit playoff run with a coach who was not the right coach for a rebuild in John Tortorella. There were good players in that draft. There were good players earlier in that draft that were available. And they didn't get them because they went on a fake playoff run. And then they traded down. And instead of taking Zeev Buyam, who has the same agent as Cutter Gauthier, and because apparently they were very, adamant in this belief that Zeev Buyam is too small, and they already had small defensemen on their team, he wasn't the guy to go after. They took a guy who I think is going to at most be a bottom six forward, maybe. Yeah, I think that's the move that really, really potentially bones this entire rebuild. Let's see. GJG 5087 says the Flyers watched Lachenko in World Juniors and immediately made this deal. I mean, listen, that's They weren't using World Junior as the way to like make a true determination on whether or not Lutsenko was going to be an actual player and like part of the short term and long term. But like he hasn't looked good at World Junior. He hasn't. There have been very, very few moments in this tournament where you say, oh, Lutsenko looks like a future NHLer in a meaningful way. Like, I'm sorry. If the best version of this is you traded down and passed on Zeev Buium, who was the centerpiece of a deal for a potential franchise cornerstone defenseman in Quinn Hughes, if your best argument is he was a year younger than everybody else in his draft class and the Flyers thought they were getting a steal and that he would have gone higher the next year, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. To quote Hulk Hogan, that doesn't work for me, brother. It doesn't work. It's insane. That is like big braining. That is like trying to play 7D chess. Just make the easy call. Take Buium. Just take the guy that maybe has the upside to be a number one defenseman or a top pair defenseman. Don't take the guy that is a year younger because you think it's going to be sensational value. And because you thought at his age, it's amazing how strong he is and how quick he is and compare him to Rod Brind'Amour. Like, no, stop. Let's see. Tony Louis says Zegras is going to ask for a Rantanen type deal and Briere will write him a blank check. That won't happen. See, this is the thing that I think is what makes all of this complicated, right? The Zegras of it all and the negotiation for Zegras is what I think is really going to overcomplicate things. They don't think he's a center, or they're at least unwilling to play him as a center. I can't figure out for the life of me. Are they waiting for him to get hurt because he's had injury concerns? Are they waiting for him to cool off so they can try to get a discount? Like, what was the number that they're that petrified of having to give him? And like, why? Why are they? Zegras is about as important of a player to getting this team to being a perennial playoff team and maybe even a cup contender as just about anyone else on the roster. Like, if you had to make a case for who has the highest upside on this team, whose ceiling is the highest, you would hope that Michkov is one of those guys. You would obviously hope that Zegras is one of those guys. You would hope that Drysdale has another level to get to. You will hope that like Cam York has another level to get to. You'll hope that Travis Sanheim remains that really steady top pair defenseman, but probably not a number one defenseman, right? Who else are you looking at saying, oh, there's a real high ceiling here? These are legitimate contributors, real impact players on a potential cup contender. I don't think you have that many of them. That's the problem. Year 3 of a rebuild. That's a problem. Let me see. I'm going to try to skip around here a little bit because I see comments coming in. Let's see. Sean Eels says, really a 2-year extension, can trade him after year 3. You trade him after year 1 if he's willing to waive the no trade. But again, was there really a need to do it? I don't know. Let's see. I see a lot of the same kind of stuff over here. I want to make sure that I'm also not getting too far behind on the comments that are coming in now. JMJR13 says Flyers scouting department strikes again. Just remember, they've used high picks on centers in Lutsenko and Nesbitt. I think Nesbitt has a higher upside. Not everybody does. Some people think that Jet Lutsenko will ultimately be more NHL ready, but at a lower spot on the depth chart. Make of that what you will. The fact is neither of them right now are being viewed as a guy that could be a 1C. So like, I don't know. Was it worth it? Was the quasi rebuild worth it? I don't know. Sting Chameleon 1 says Zegras number just went way up. I don't know how much this impacts the Zegras number. Like, listen, if Zegras ends up being a point per game guy, well, then you're talking about a player that's going to expect $10 million a year. And I think earlier this season, the Flyers probably could have gotten into a negotiation and gotten around like 8.75. You know, you're playing with fire. The longer you allow this season to go on and Zegras to perform at a point per game pace, the more likely you are to get burned on that AAV. And then you have to hope that his ability to stay healthy this year, which again, he has not proven to be able to do for a number of years in the league, you have to hope that he is going to remain healthy this year and however many years you decide to give him going forward. And you also have to hope that like he's going to be a $10 million player without Christian Dvorak if they split him up at some point. Rob Hood 5636 says this team and the roster moves are beyond puzzling. Yeah, I get it. Let's see. JMJR13 says, I would rather get a vet on a short-term deal and take advantage of trading Dvorak for assets than signing him long-term to reward him because they like him and he helps fill a role we were extremely weak in temporarily. So here's the problem, though. They don't have another option. This could just be a failure to build a cohesive roster. You could make an argument that this is just poor roster construction and poor talent evaluation, that they didn't feel like they had another option internally, that like they couldn't really entertain the idea of trading Dvorak for potentially a first-round pick at the deadline. They felt like they were so up against it, they had to make this move because there are no free agent centers available, and the trade value that is being put on other potentially available centers is far too high. To me, they've shot themselves in the foot a few times, and they were kind of leveraged. Right? They didn't have leverage. Dvorak's camp had all the leverage. Not great. Let me see. I'm going to keep skipping ahead here. Casey Yorty, 6188 says, agreed, being way too liberal with the no movement clauses. I think a no movement and no trade, like regardless, right? Because there are different things like being put on waivers, getting sent to the minors, all that. That's part of a no movement versus a no trade. Either way, having your roster flexibility being limited by the decisions of a player is problematic, especially when you're still in the midst of some form of a rebuild and you're trying to pull the nose up on it and trying to become a playoff contender. Having players be able to kind of dictate whether or not they are movable or not really is an issue. What's this? I'm trying to figure out this name. John Irizarry says they seem more worried about looking like a franchise that has turned the corner, and C, we didn't need to tank for 10 years, and C, we made the playoffs. There might be truth to that. There could be. They didn't want to tear this thing down. I said for a while, right, if you really wanted to tear this thing down to the studs, you wouldn't have re-signed Owen Tippett. You certainly wouldn't have re-signed Travis Konechny. You would have dealt them both, gotten more assets, and tried to get really creative in the draft or get really creative in using a bunch of those assets and maybe tying them to a roster player or two and trying to bring in a higher ceiling player. They didn't do that. They didn't want to tear it all the way down. I could point to a bunch of examples of teams that had to tank for a long time or had to be bad for a really long time, but then ultimately went on to win Stanley Cups. Yeah, tanking doesn't guarantee that you're going to win. Tanking doesn't guarantee you a Stanley Cup. Doing a lot of patchwork moves also typically doesn't have a great track record of working. So again, make of it what you will. Let's see. I'm trying to flip through some of this. Ryan McNamee says, here we go, LOL. So what do they project Dvorak to be? A 2C? Who pays a bottom 6C, 5.5 with this team they have? So like, if you try to play this one out the way that they probably should, right? In an ideal world, Trevor Zegras is your 1C. And you say that based on age, based on elite skill set, based on a lot of things, he could kind of fill in that role of a 1C until you can get a bona fide 1C. You would then say Sean Couturier as your 2C, even with a limited physical ability of Sean Couturier as a 2C isn't the end of the world. Dvorak is your 3C, Noah Cates is your 4C, and you say, all right, like that could be a playoff team. But again, they will not roll the dice on Zegras as a center. And so it looks like you have Dvorak as one of your top two centers. Now, $5 million a year for a top two center is a good deal, except there aren't many teams that would consider Christian Dvorak to be a top two center because he really isn't one. K-Dub 1323 says Jack Berglund is probably the Flyers' best prospect at World Juniors. Lachenko was the worst. I mean, we were talking about like guys like Ruinen, right? We were talking about guys like Berglund before we were even getting to the lack of impact of Lachenko. Luke Ryan Reese says, awful, just awful. You know, I get it. Let's see. Robert Behrman says Zegras was a steal, but if he could learn to win draws, he would be elite. Yeah, I mean, if he could win draws, they'd probably feel better about him as a center, and we'd actually get to see what he is. John Israel asks, where is our true number one defenseman, number one center? But we have a team of third and fourth liners, only a handful of talented players. I know all the players are better than I am, but they don't win championships. It's funny. This is an important, there's a nuance to this comment that is correct. And it's something that I've had to talk to my kids about, right? So my kids will look at me and they'll say, all right, is this guy a good player? We were talking about Igor Zamula in the car the other day. And I talked about this on the show earlier today about Zamula not reporting to Pittsburgh. And I was explaining to my two oldest sons in the car, Zamula is not a good player relative to other NHL players. You go all right, is Igor Zamula a good player? Is he a bad player? Relative to all hockey players on the earth, he's a very good hockey player. He managed to carve out time playing in the NHL, the best league in the world. That automatically makes him one of the best, quote unquote, one of the best players in the world. Even if you ultimately are an AHL level player, that still means that you are one of the best players in the world. You are still playing at a professional level, while there are many players who will never even come close to sniffing the AHL, right? But relative to other players who are in the NHL, Igor Zamula stinks. Christian Dvorak has carved out a legitimate place as an NHL forward, which inherently makes him one of the best players in the world relative to all hockey players. Among other centers in the NHL, is he elite? No. Is he top half? Probably not. Is he a solid third line center? Sure. Relative to other centers in the league. Do the Flyers have a lot of third and fourth line players? They do. Have the Flyers overvalued some of their own players? Yes. Do I think that the Flyers will ultimately realize the error of their ways and move some of those guys? Yes. I think they will. I hope they will. Otherwise, this thing really is going to be a disaster. This is going to be a hockey purgatory team for another 5 years, and then they'll move on from this front office, and then another set of people will come in, and they also will be kind of given the directive not to tear it down to the studs, and then we're just going to keep this cycle going again and again and again. I still want to believe that there are enough positive signs that this team could pull the nose up. I will give Danny Briere credit in that, he has done a very good job of finding value along the margins. No one thought Dan Vladar was going to be a number one goalie. Put in the right situation, Vladar has been excellent this year. Christian Dvorak was a guy that people thought was going to be a bottom six forward, not have much of an impact on the team. Again, how much of it is him? How much of it is Zegras? I don't know. But he's now gotten himself a 5-year deal. And again, I think he would have gotten $6 million plus in free agency had he hit free agency. You talk about trades. The Zegras deal, right? Getting Zegras for Ryan Poehling. That is a great bit of business, right? And then there's some contracts that are given out that I genuinely just don't understand. No one bats 1,000. There is not a single GM or president of hockey ops who gets everything right. I think that the place where I think GMs set themselves apart is if they can make those moves along the margins. It's easy to go out and get a big money free agent to go to a big market team and take a ton of money, ton of guaranteed money. It takes a lot more to be able to go and find the players that fill out the roster that are significantly better than expected, right? That's where the positivity comes in. That's where you have to believe, if you want this Flyers team to be very good, be a perennial contender, you have to hope that that is ultimately what's going to separate Danny Briere from his predecessors. And you have to ultimately hope that he's able to make the moves that need to be made to get this team into contention. It's kind of hard to see how you get to that path right now. Air Raider says, my issue is that before the season, it felt like we knew what the direction of the rebuild was. Now it feels like there's no direction anymore, and we're just back to patching it together. The 26 free agent class going up in smoke, I think absolutely threw this front office for a loop. Again, I really do think they thought that they would get a meeting with at least McDavid or Kaprizov, and neither of those obviously are coming to fruition. Not good. It's just not good. Let's see. This person has a lot of consonants. a lot of consonants, a couple of vowels in there. There's no way I can read that off. But says, I think like most people, I say I'm happy with the extension, just not 5 years. Also, I hear it's really 3, and that's kind of coping. Again, I think Dvorak is a good player. I'm not like doing jumping jacks. I'm also not like ready to go walk into traffic. 5 years just seems like a lot, and no trade seems kind of unnecessary, but here we are. Miller Brad says, taking receipts with all the Negadelphia chair GMs in here, shake my head, just accept it and root for them. I mean, people are allowed to also be upset if they want to be upset. This is just how it works. John says, you should be able to take it out on Dvorak because we, the fans, pay for tickets and merch. You could also choose not to. You could choose not to buy tickets. You could choose not to, buy merch. You could do that. Maybe that sends a message. I don't know. Christopher Grandrino says, this is Nolan Patrick Kevin Hayes 2.0 with Jet and Dvorak. No. I am willing to accept hyperbole. I am willing to even delve into hyperbole myself. This is not Nolan Patrick Kevin Hayes under any circumstances. No way. Nolan Patrick, man, was the drive to be great there? There were plenty who thought no. Was there elite or top 2 in the draft talent in Nolan Patrick? There was. It was a career that was derailed by concussions. And again, maybe the drive to be one of the all-time greats wasn't there. We will never know. The Kevin Hayes thing was its own issue. The Kevin Hayes thing never made sense. It was an overpay. It was a guy who I always called a 2.5C. It wasn't a 1.5C. It wasn't like, well, Kevin Hayes could be a 1C temporarily on a bad team, and then when he's a 2C, he's great. I always thought he was like probably best suited as a 3C, but it would give Nolan Patrick a year of cover to play as the 3C, and then eventually take that 2C, and then hopefully take the 1C. Concussions happen, and it didn't happen. I don't think there's anybody who has viewed what Jetlachenko's game is and say, that is a 1C, and now that he's not reaching that potential, like Dvorak is going to fill that. Like, no, I will not accept that as a 1-for-1 comp. No, I won't. Respectfully, no. Let me see. Brian Knowlton says, I'm in the indifferent camp at this moment. However, is he not on pace for a career year? He is. He's on pace for like 50 or so points. He's never gone over 38 in his career. He has had success in the past with Rick Tocchet. So like here, you want another positive. If you want a positive to like really, really lose your mind with, right? This player has had success with this coach. You assume that Tocchet getting the deal and getting hired this year, Tocchet's got at least 3 years. You've given 5 years to Dvorak. You assume that Tocchet, as long as everything goes, like other than dumpster fire, has at least 3 years. The likelihood of Dvorak being at or around his career high, 38 points, maybe into the 40s. Could he get to 52? Maybe. Maybe that makes you feel a little bit better. You don't have the uncertainty of a coach at the end of his contract, and now you're signing Dvorak, and you don't know if he's going to mesh well with the coach that's going to come in the following year. Maybe that's a positive. I don't know. You let me know. Let's see. Slapshot 68 says, I'm so sick and tired of being told to be optimistic for a bad contract the Flyers sign. This deal sucks. Slapshot might be right. I'm not ready to say that it sucks. I'm willing to admit that it might not be perfect, and it might not be great, and that it might be too long, and that the no trade clause might be a terrible decision. Willing to accept all of it. Let's see. Solar Warden 88 says, LOL, WTF. I just got in from hockey to see this. Why, Danny? Why? 48 Scipone. Is that Scipone? Is that Scipone? Says, this is the most fun this team has been since Ed Snyder was alive, and we want Danny gone for signing someone playing well. If you live in the world where you look at this Flyers team and you look at their results year over year, and you are very much of the belief right now that this team is the best one, the most fun in the better part of a decade, you could certainly believe that. You could certainly live that life. There have been some horrific teams that we have had to be subjected to night in and night out. This team, at the very least, is better than some of the really bad teams. I'm not sure that this team is like a legitimate, can go into the playoffs and, maybe somehow upset a team in the first round. But I'm willing to admit that like they are better than most people thought they would be. Again, is that good? I don't know. Solar Warden says, brutal man. I don't want him in the team this long. 5 years is way too much. 3 years max. Let's see. There's some other stuff over here. Let me kind of skip through some of. There were a lot of comments. I'm trying to get to as many as I can. Amadeo says, Matvei Mishkov coming over early shouldn't have changed any plan they had. It's their own fault. Well, I think it did. I've been on record. I think that Michkov coming over early really did throw a wrench in this. I think that they would have probably taken it a little bit further to the studs, but as soon as he came over, you couldn't do that. You couldn't run the risk of having this like super horrible losing culture hit this young player as he made the transition to North America as the most highly touted prospect in a generation for this team. I don't think you could have done it. And I think that's where things maybe initially went a little bit sideways. Forza Azuri says, proof that this was never a real rebuild. Ooh. Chris Berry 643 says, I wonder if Taco had input in this decision. Is Jules next? Sorry, couldn't resist. He has his favorites. If they go out and re-sign Noah Juleson, then we're gonna have a problem. Okay. Slapshot 68 says, dude, I don't want to be so hard on Lachenko since he's a kid, but this deal screams they don't think he's going to be good. It certainly means they don't think that he's going to be ready anytime soon. I said that earlier in the show. It's not great. Blazers 9184 says Zegras Drysdale next, and Brink is sadly gone. I don't know what's going to happen with Brink. There are definitely people around Xfinity Mobile Arena who tend to think that Brink isn't exactly Tockett's like favorite player. So maybe Brink isn't going to be here long term. Could you try to make the pitch right now that Dvorak has a higher ceiling than Brink? I don't think so. Can you make the case that Dvorak, as a guy who can also play center, is more useful in your lineup longer term than Brink, who can only play wing? I guess you could try if you really wanted to. I'm not sure that that's a great point to make, though. Alex Smith says they needed one more year of a top 5 draft pick. What the Blackhawks, Ducks, and Sharks are doing will all lead to long-term success. It's really hard to look at those other teams and not feel like they are ahead of this Flyers rebuild. And they were willing to take the pain of really tearing it down. Ouija Shadows, I can't read the whole thing, says, if I'm the Flyers, I'd consider firing Danny Briere. Well, you are not the Flyers, and they're not firing Danny Briere. That is lunacy. That will not happen. Let's see. I think I'm almost caught up. No, I'm not. Holy smokes. I'm at comments from 18 minutes ago. All right, let me see. Eminem's Encore says they mentioned his impact in the locker room when I read the quote about the extension culture. I can't with that. That part is insane. All right, I'm going to try to catch up to the tour of the comments right now. Nick Abe asks, what is the direction for the team? Like, actually, I want to know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't actually think that. I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to see the path to this becoming a cup contending team. I thought that in the offseason, they were getting closer to having a window with the Martone draft, ballsy move moving up for Nesbitt. We'll see if he ends up panning out. Knowing that 2026 had some real free agents coming, 27 was going to have Quinn Hughes. But I had a way to map this out for the Flyers. I don't have the way to map it right now because I think the worst part of all of it is that they just don't have enough elite players in the farm system to be able to try to make a big splashy move. And that's your quickest way to try to contend. KW1323 asks, when are all the connections Jonesy supposedly have going to pay off? I don't know. I mean, it's a fair criticism. You could also look at it like this. Part of the rationale behind signing Rick Tocchet as head coach was the relationships that he has with free agents, right? The relationship that he has with other players, and very, very, what's the nice way to put this? They were putting a lot into this notion that Tocchet was going to be able to go out and woo potential free agents. And if there's a guy who maybe had a no trade clause, a no movement clause, that maybe Rick Tocchet would be able to convince that guy to waive it. There are no free agents available in 2026. So that mitigates any of the value, right? It mitigates any of the potential value of Tocchet as somebody who could woo a player. And again, I don't think Vancouver ever wanted to trade Quinn Hughes to the Flyers, trade him to the team that has the head coach that decided to leave them and go to Philadelphia. You better hope that in 2027, Tocchet is able to absolutely make the pitch of his life to get Quinn Hughes to sign here as a free agent. Brandon Summerman says, I think you made the greatest point to why they did it. The 2026 free agent class is nothing anymore. Couldn't get into a bidding war to keep Dvorak because they needed a center. Yeah. Forza says, holy man, it's been 50 years. We're allowed to be a bit pissed. I'm not telling you you can't be. I'm telling you you can be pissed. You could choose to be happy. Live your best life. Josh over on X asks, do you think there is anything in the works for the Flyers in the next year or two, a trade for a top-end talent or signing a top-end talent? Wondering if there's anyone potentially on the market. No. Well, so this is the problem, right? I put out there, I wouldn't say that this was a report, okay? I am not saying that this was a report. I merely passed along from very informed conversations, we'll say, what it would have taken the Flyers to make a deal for Quinn Hughes. Porter Martone was like the number one ask. A roster level player, preferably a defenseman like Cam York, would have had to be part of it. Then maybe another roster player. Could a guy like a Tyson Forster or an Owen Tippett have needed to be part of the deal? Then probably a center, because this team doesn't have a center worth trading. Then you're talking about a potential center. Would a Lachenko or a Nesbitt have been like that next piece? All right, so you're up to 4, then a first round pick 5. Talking about like 5 assets, including multiple roster players and one of your center prospects. Could that have gotten it done? Maybe. Did you want to trade Porter Martone? I don't think I necessarily would have wanted to trade Porter Martone. Could you make a case that trading all of those assets together, those assets still don't add up to having a potentially top 3 defenseman in the league? You can make that argument. If it had been possible to negotiate a contract with Quinn Hughes, the Flyers probably pulled the trigger on just about any deal to lock in that number 1 defenseman. But they couldn't, because they couldn't negotiate that contract. They had no assurances that he would be with the team beyond the 2026-27 season. They chose not to make that deal. They chose not to sweeten the pot, whatever it was. So if they weren't willing to do that for Quinn Hughes, what makes you think they're going to be willing to do anything like that for another player that hits the market? What player would that be? I threw out a while ago, a month ago, if the Sabres become the Sabres again, this is before the Sabres went on a hell of a heater. If Rasmus Dahlin hits the market, do the Flyers make the deal? Well, of course, because then that's a number 1 defenseman who's under contract for 7 more years or so. I think at $11.5 million a year. Yeah, okay, you make that deal. What other guys are going to come available on the market? What team is looking to move their number 1 center or their true number 1 defenseman? And what do the Flyers have that no one else does? Pretty much any trade's going to have to start with Martone or Michkov. And then a bunch of roster players and probably picks. Are you going to do that? Is that more attractive, more enticing than what other teams that are looking for the same thing going to offer? Like, I can't imagine so. Let's see. I'm going to try once again to get as close to live on the comments as I can. Kirk McCracken says they already have a losing culture. Well, it hasn't been a winning culture, that's for sure. Christopher Grandrino says the franchise hasn't recovered from Pronger getting hurt in 2011. I mean, that really did feel like a true curse, and it's a shame. I hate playing the what if, man, but if Pronger never gets hurt, team probably gets back to a cup, maybe wins one. That, I think, is like the most crushing modern day loss of a player too soon. Is the Pronger injury. Let's see. The Orange Crush over on YouTube says the country club atmosphere strikes again. Dvorak was the latest recipient of an undeserved contract. Again, 3 years at that cap hit, you're probably feeling like it's a great bit of business. 3 years at $6 million, you maybe say it's still a decent bit of business. 5 years at 5.15, I think is it's long. It is. Dylan Forster 3720 says, I think we should have let him walk and open up a 4C spot for Jacob Gosha. No, stop. No, that's crazy. That's a little bit crazy. Joe Melfi says year 3, and this is a left playoff team who signs a center slightly below market value for a slightly longer term. Seriously, people get over it. There's no elite talent at center to begin with. Could be viewed as a fair and balanced take. Gritty says Flyers just want to trade every player at the deadline for late draft picks that rarely turn into anything. Y'all praise the Lawton trade for getting Grabenkin, and he isn't even a good player. Grabenkin is a good player. Stop that. Grabenkin is a good player. Stop that. Let's see. I mean, here you go. So, Dylan Forster, thank you for the super chat. Very nice of you. Says Gaucher, Lane, Peterson, Abels as the 3C, 4C. I guess would be better than this contract. I don't know if I agree with that, but maybe. What is this? Luchenko will be a 2C at best, maybe fringe 1C with the right line mates. Who the fuck are his line mates to get him to be a fringe 1C? Who are his line mates to get him to be a 2C? If he's a 2C, he better have the best wings in the entire league. No. 3C at best. Probably a 4C. I ain't seeing it. I'm not seeing it. Let's see. There were more things over here. Good God, there's a lot. Will Griffin says, I like Dvorak. 5 years is a little long. He's a great player right now. Great. No, he's a very good player for what his role is right now. But I would probably argue with X Shadow here. He's not a great player. He's a good player. That's okay. Chris Reed says, Bob, trading Bob is worse than losing Pronger. I actually disagree. I get it. I know that Bobrovsky was a Vezina winner. I get it. Won a cup, won 2 cups. I get it. Understood. There's no guarantee that Bobrovsky's Bobrovsky if he stays in Philadelphia. There is nothing that makes me think that like they were going to be able to help him reach his ceiling. Pronger, we knew what Pronger was. Pronger could have played for anybody in any system and been an absolutely dominant number one defenseman. Let's see. Rob Hood says, this team isn't going anywhere. You have to make a bold move. I don't know what bold move they can make, though. Again, this is where the lack of legitimately great assets in the farm system, in the pipeline, really is going to come back to hurt you. Like, if there is a bidding war for... Play this one out. When Jack Eichel became available, the big thing that was holding teams back potentially from trying to make a move for him was, remember, he had the dispute with Buffalo about the disc replacement surgery in his neck. Is there another player out there right now that projects to be like a 1C who's in the midst of a medical dispute with his team? No? Okay, so the Eichel thing is out. Reinhart, right? When Sam Reinhart was moved, I liked Sam Reinhart. I wanted the Flyers to get involved in the Sam Reinhart sweepstakes, right? There's no player right now who even projects to be like a Sam Reinhart level player. But if that guy were available, and there is a bidding war, there's a trade bidding war, what do the Flyers have that is unique or better than what other teams in a similar position are going to offer? I'd argue that while they may have improved their farm system a bit, I wouldn't say that it's exactly like full of top prospects. It's a nice way to put it. Forza says, appreciate you, Russ. You're the only Flyers podcast or writer that even comes close to getting how botched the rebuild is. The team is stuck in limbo right now and have no way to get a 1C or a 1D. The way to get the 1D is to hope and pray that Quinn Hughes idolizes Rick Tocchet. There is your path to a number one defenseman. If I were the Flyers right now, my next year and a half is to try to figure out how to get that number one center. I am going to put all of my eggs in the basket that Quinn Hughes hits free agency in 2027 and absolutely loves Rick Tocchet and loves the idea of being close to but not playing on the same team as his brothers. And I put everything I have into that as my fix for a number one defenseman. And in the meantime, I try to figure out, is there a number two center who has number one center upside? How do I go out and get that guy? That's what I spend the next year and a half doing if I'm the Flyers. Anything other than that is a waste of time. Let's see. Well, there you go. X Shadow says no one wants our shit. Yeah. Let's see. Gritty says, I say we trade for Cutter Gauthier. You know, if you think about it, if you really want to hate yourself and hate your life, you could ask yourself the question, would you rather have Cutter Gauthier and Zeev Bouillon and Porter Martone, or would you rather have Jamie Drysdale and Jet Lachenko and Porter Martone? I think the first group probably wins. But again, I'd also just look at the fake playoff run season, and it's not great. Yeah, it's just not good, not great. All right, let me see. Amadeo goes, how on God's green earth are you getting a center for Sam Ersson and Bobby Brink? Well, you're clearly not. Yeah, you're not. Let's see. Joe Papel says the Panthers gave up a number 1 to Buffalo for Reinhart, while the Flyers gave up a number 1 to Buffalo for Risto. Fletcher Mort. I mean, that's a Chuck Fletcher special. Don't forget, like, having to attach a valuable pick to get rid of Gostisbehere's contract was another Chuck Fletcher special. So you gotta be careful. JMJR13 says, I can't believe that their whole thing was be patient, it's going to take some time, and now they're forcing and rushing the thing forward for no reason and instantly reward a bad contract. This is where I don't think that the Dvorak trade or the Dvorak signing is a thing that breaks your rebuild and breaks your team and is horrific, right? And at the same time, I get the frustration. I just think everybody's kind of piling on, or a lot of people are piling on because they're frustrated with the rebuild as a whole. Orange Crush says, oh, Russ, you say they don't have a deep farm center? Well, geez, only one way to have done that. Hint, using something used in a war, and the Flyers refused that. They had a chance and now are stuck. I said for a while, like, take it all the way down, get as many top picks as you can, and roll the dice and hope that some of those guys develop into legit studs. They didn't do that. Here we are. I don't know. Let's see. K-Dub asks, would the Flyers have drafted Martone if they still had Gauthier? Got to figure they may have drafted Higgins or Martin. So I gathered they did not want Higgins, flat out. Would they have drafted Martone if they still had Cutter? Maybe not. Yeah, maybe that's a fair point. I don't know. That might be a fair point, though. Guido's here. Guido Valenti says, because Brent Flair not capable to pick the good guy 2 years in a row, Lachenko and Nesbitt, Danny Briere signed Dvorak 5 years, ridiculous, too long, same mistake, then Konechny. Yo, Guido, my fellow Italian. I assume Guido has to be Italian. I mean, I don't want to assume your nationality, your ethnicity, but Guido, you and I share some Italian heritage here. This is about as much of a cheese pinch, prayer hands kind of like comment as we could have, because of Brent Flair, not capable. I'm going to just cheese pinch and prayer hands. I will tell you, Guido, if it makes you feel any better, before I came down to do the show, I was going to make myself a little something to eat, right? Because I have this bad habit of eating before bed, which is terrible for you and also kind of eliminates a lot of the benefits of like intermittent fasting and trying to lose weight. I had like 2 slices of fresh mozzarella before I came downstairs to do the show. So Guido, here's looking at you. Now, Brandon Summerman says, last 2 years, especially with cap projected to be 120 million plus, it's barely 4% of the cap. It's equal to 3 million now. Hopefully he can be a third line vet contributor during those years, valuable for playoff teams. It's fair. I guess the only pushback there, right, is when we start talking about the cap percentage, that means that at least right now, the belief is that the number is too high. But if you look at what Dvorak is making now and what he made on his last contract, I think it's fair value for that player. It's just too long. The deal is too long. Let me see. Yeah, there you go. Like Heavy Hitter says, 5 years is too many. Let's see. I thought I saw something else over here. Okay. Papel says, certainly if the Flyers had Cutter and Bouillon, they would have definitely been a player in the Hughes trade. Yeah, maybe. Probably. Possibly. Gritty says, hey, Russ, didn't you say you were going to stop Briere at the elevator and question him if Dvorak signed a long-term extension and gave him a trade protection? I did. Guess what I'm going to do tomorrow? I'm going to look for Danny. See, this is the thing. This is one of those beautiful things about the partnership with the Flyers and about being down there for all 41 home games. And I think I probably make it to 38 out of 41. The first year I made all 41. I usually give myself a couple of days. Danny Briere, Keith Jones, Dan Hilferty, some combination of those guys goes past our setup on the Press Row Show every home game, right by the organ. You take the elevator at the glass doors, section 121, all the way up to the balcony. Some combination of those guys goes past our setup every single night. Now, sometimes it's while we're already live doing Press Row Show pregame, but oftentimes it's before we go live. And there are times where there's a side conversation had. Sometimes it's context. Sometimes it's trying to figure out, would they actually have interest in a player? Would they be willing to make a move? Would they be willing to move some legitimate pieces to go out and get a guy who could be a franchise changer, right? And sometimes it's something innocuous, like, can you believe how awful traffic was today? I will have a conversation. If I see Danny Briere on Tuesday, before we go live with the Press Row Show, I will ask him some questions. I will. I'm very much of this thought right now. They must have believed that, like, if the Flyers wanted the 5 years and not Dvorak, the Flyers really wanted the 5 years, then to me, the no trade clause had to have come from the Dvorak side, just to know where he was going to be for at least 2 years. But I don't know. Dylan Forster asks, "What if Tomasino clicks?" I don't think he will. I don't know why he would. Yeah, I wouldn't put much into that. Guido says, "Please, Danny, don't talk about rebuild process anymore. I'm a big Flyers fan. Very disappointed." Guido, it's okay. It's gonna be okay, Guido. It's gonna be okay. Where are we at? I just saw a thing about Brian Knowlton asks, "Danny on pregame tomorrow?" I doubt it, but maybe. Probably not. They don't usually hop on shows right after these deals are made. The one exception was when we had Dan Hilferty on the same night that Cutter Gauthier got dealt, to give some context about why they felt the need to make that move that night. Flyers fan 94 with an interesting question. Is Forster not expendable at this point to land a number 1C or number 1 defenseman? I think that if Tyson Forster were healthy, which has become a problem now, multiple injuries, right? He would be one of the most attractive players, one of the most attractive roster players. But I still don't think he's like the centerpiece of a deal. He maybe is able to get you out of having, like in that Quinn Hughes deal, maybe gets you from having to give up 5 assets down to 3 or maybe to 4, but you still have to include an elite guy like a Martone, elite prospect like Martone, or a guy who like legitimately is one of your highest upside players like a Matvei Michkov. I don't think Forster moves the needle as far as we might want him to. Let's see. Rob Hood says they should have went all in on Chychrun with those picks last year. I liked Chychrun. I thought that he was a guy that could have been available. They could have made a move for, and they did not, for whatever reason. Guido says, "Hi, Russ. You're very good." Stop it, Guido. Hey, Guido. Great guy. We love Guido. We love Guido. Let me see. What does this say over here? Liam Nace says, people over-hating the Devo signing, maybe 3 to 4 years would have been better. Cap hit is fine. There you go. There's a positive. See, we've had some positive people hopping in and out. Forza Azuri says, "Guys, I can't do another 50 years. I'll be dead." We might all be dead at that point, man. Who knows? Right? I'd love to see a Flyers Stanley Cup in my lifetime. But my already large forehead that has always been this big, this 5-head or 6-head or whatever, if the years ever happen where this recedes, this, believe it or not, this is not a receding hairline. It always has been this big of a 5-head or 6-head or 7-head. I actually went back to look at pictures not that long ago because I was like, man, is my hairline going back? No, it's always been this big. Even back to like pictures of me as like a little kid. Just massive domage area here in the front. If we get 50 years, though, I think this is going to be going back, which would be bad. Would I go to Turkey for a hair transplant? Probably. I think I'm vain enough, yeah. Yeah, I might have dad bod and a massive forehead, but I think I'm vain enough to like not want to go bald. I got a huge noggin. If I started going bald, I'd be like, that would be bad. I don't think it would go well. Make a trip to Turkey. K-Dev asks, is Forster made of porcelain? No, but I'm a little bit worried about the propensity for injury. Amadeo says, Flyers have been bad for more than half of my life. I've known more bad hockey than good. There's nothing to be positive about. Well, for God's sake, Amadeo, let's try to be a little bit more positive, okay? Brian Dalton says, please just give us one before we all kick the bucket. That's fair. Let's see. I think we pulled something up earlier like this with Air Raiders. I think that the real question is just going to be, what are the Flyers going to be able to present to the fan base to give them hope about the future? And so let me try to wrap, I guess, with a little bit of positivity. So we all saw what happened when Tyson Forster went out, and there were a lot of questions of what this team was going to do. Were they going to try to make a short-term move? Sherwood was a name that came up out of Vancouver. Could they make a move like that? I think the team was getting ready to call up Alex Bump. He got hurt, so instead they brought up Denver Barkey. Now, Tocchet today had some comments about how the kid can't live out of a suitcase. He was going to have to talk to Briere and Jonesy to figure out what the best path is for Barkey. I think Barkey's done enough to remain here. I do. I've been a big Gurbankin guy all year. I get it. The results aren't always there, but I want to believe that Gurbankin is still worth playing at the NHL level. Barkey has played well. Is there a path here to seeing a guy like Alex Bump get a look? I think he will. Is there a path to Porter Martone being on this team at the end of the regular season, maybe even going into the playoffs? I think there very well could be a possibility of that happening. It all depends on how Michigan State does. I don't want it to sound like I think the Flyers the Flyers organization lacks any good players or lacks any good young players. I think that we can all agree that they lack a decent enough number of high enough upside or elite upside players to justify being as bad as they have been for a decade and to justify year 3 of a rebuild. If the best players you have in this whole thing are Michkov and Martone, and they both hit their ceiling, those are two very, very good, maybe even borderline star wings with no centers to go with it. That's a problem. With no path to a number one defenseman internally, that's a problem. Barkey could be really good. Bump could be really good. They could be very good value players given where they were drafted. Nesbitt could maybe turn into something, but I always hoped that if this team were going to take on some version of a rebuild and acknowledge it publicly, which is what Briere's front office has done and had done, I definitely expected there to be higher upside elite talent in the farm system that you would say, all right, maybe that guy's not ready to be in the lineup from day one, but would certainly get there within a year or two. I don't think they have enough of those guys, and that is where you ultimately feel kind of let down by this so far. Willie Whitmore says, Jack Berglund 1C. Berglund has been really interesting at World Junior. I have no idea what to make of him. I have no idea what to think about him long term. I have no clue. Genuinely, I have no clue. Nick Abe says, some fans look at this organization and say we should have Bill Zito. Well, remember, Bill Zito interviewed here. They gave him like a courtesy interview. I think it was a virtual interview. I think that was when they hired Chuck Fletcher to give like the courtesy interview to Bill Zito. He's only gone on to build a multi-time Stanley Cup winning team. I get it. The situations aren't the same. The talent on the roster, not the same. I get it, but still, not great. X Shadow says, when Barkey gets stronger and a little older, he's going to be a menace on the boards. I tend to agree. JM Jar says, can't wait for the first round exits, missing the playoffs, and maybe a lucky run to the second round here and there for the next 10 years and then do it all over again. I mean, it would be the worst case scenario. And unfortunately, it feels like it could be a scenario. We'll see. We'll see. Dylan says, I don't think you need stars to win a cup, just balanced depth, all contributing at the same time. Look at 2010 to 2015, volatile, yes, but that falls on coaching. Look at Vladar for an example, good enough. I think you can patchwork a number one goalie or a cup contending goalie easier than you can try to patchwork a number one center or a number one defenseman. Vladar's been really good. See, I actually feel kind of weird now. We're almost an hour and a half into the show. I meant to do 25 minutes. It's been almost an hour and a half. And I appreciate all of you who have joined me. Truly, I do. Here's the problem, right? To wrap this up, the Dvorak signing in a vacuum isn't a bad contract. $5 million a year is not going to make or break the Flyers. 5 years is too long. A no trade clause for the first 2 years is silly. This is not the move that will define whether or not the Flyers reach Stanley Cup contender level in the next 3 to 5 years. But we don't operate in a vacuum. You look at the context of where this team is at and where it projects to be, and I understand the frustration. And that is some of what we saw in the comments tonight. That is some of what I'm sure we will continue to see on social media overnight and into Tuesday and into the Press Row show on Tuesday night, where I'm sure at least one person on the panel will tell you that this is a great signing. And then I will try to bring some nuance to the conversation. We spent about 90 minutes here collectively as a group. I hope I've been able to give you some nuance and a fair and balanced look at the contract. I don't think it is a backbreaker. I also don't think it's a sensational bit of business. It's kind of a middle of the road deal. If Dvorak 3 years from now is still producing at or around a 45 to 50 point season, and he continues to be a responsible two-way center, and this team acquires a center at some point who can be one of your top two centers, this isn't a bad deal. If the Flyers are in a spot where 2 years from now, 3 years from now, Christian Dvorak legitimately is your 2C, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And that's where I think we're going to leave it at, right? I think that's what we'll leave it. JMJR says, thanks, Russ. I had to let my frustration and negativity out. That's what I'm here for. Brian Knowlton, thanks for being here. Appreciate all of you for being here. I'm glad that people enjoyed being able to vent. That is the point of the show tonight. We didn't get as ridiculous and over the top and as irreverent as we sometimes can get on the show. But do me a favor, if you're new, like the video, share the video, subscribe over on YouTube. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating over on Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating, a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts. I will be back on Tuesday night with the Press Row Show, live from the Xfinity Mobile Arena for pregame, intermissions, and postgame over on the Snow the Goalie channel. So join me there as I try to bring Anthony Sanfilippo, who I'm sure right now is floating on cloud 9 about this deal. I try to rein him in a little bit. Bundy will be there. Intern Andrew will be there. Join us Tuesday night. Join us Thursday night. Join us on Saturday night with 3 Press Row shows this week. And then I am off to Europe. I'll also be here Wednesday and Friday with the Russ Joy Show. You can find the show, again, on YouTube, Facebook, X, and wherever you get your podcasts. So until the next time, this has been the Russ Joy Show, and I've been Russ Joy. You knew that already because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. Have a great night, everybody. Remember, this Christian Dvorak signing, it will not make or break this rebuild. Other moves will. We'll see what moves are yet to come. Bye now.